You find out you've been dating and sleeping with your father's son. How far would you go to hide this secret from everyone? And what would it take to protect yourself from guilt haunting you? Find out in this intriguing real-life story of blood ties in the dust. The morning of Chief Abidik's funeral broke heavy and grey, as if even the sky carried the weight of his secrets. Clouds gathered low over Abuja, pressing down on the city like grief itself. The convoy of black cars snaked slowly toward Gwarinpa Cemetery, engines humming softly, tires whispering over the wet asphalt. Adara sat in the back seat of her father's Lexus, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The scent of her mother's perfume, sharp and familiar, filled the air. She hadn't cried since the night of his death, not because she didn't want to, but because something inside her felt hollow, like the tears were stuck behind a wall she couldn't break. Beside her sat Chuka, her boyfriend of almost 2 years. He held her hand loosely, his thumb brushing against her knuckles in quiet reassurance. He was calm, or at least he looked it until they reached the cemetery. When the coffin was lowered, the air shifted. The sound of soil hitting wood filled the silence like thunder. Adara's mother wailed softly beside her, her voice breaking with each syllable of his name. Adara blinked, trying to steady herself. Then she noticed Chuka. He was standing a few steps behind her, shoulders trembling. At first, she thought it was just emotion. Everyone grieves differently. But then he fell to his knees. His face crumpled, and he let out a cry so raw that even the pastor paused mid-prayer. It wasn't the cry of someone comforting a grieving lover. It was something deeper, something that clawed its way out of him. His eyes were red, his chest heaving, and when Adara touched his shoulder, he flinched as if she'd burned him. "Chuka," she whispered, but he didn't answer. The mourners turned to stare. A few relatives exchanged puzzled glances. Her uncle, always suspicious of outsiders, whispered, "Why is that young man crying like that? Was he that close to Chief?" Adara tried to smile through her confusion, pulling Chuka up gently. "It's okay," she murmured. "It's okay." But it wasn't. That evening, after the reception, Adara's mother went straight to her room, too tired to speak. Guests had come and gone, murmuring condolences that felt like echoes in a hollow house. Adara sat in the dimly lit living room, the smell of burnt jollof rice still hanging in the air from the caterers. Chaos earlier. Chuka sat opposite her, silent. His eyes were swollen, his fingers twitching restlessly. "Chuka," she said softly, "you cried a lot today." He looked up slowly, his gaze distant. "I'm sorry, It felt like I lost someone too." "You did," she said, trying to smile. "He liked you." He looked away. "Yeah, he did." There was something strange in his voice. Not sorrow, not quite guilt either, but something between the two. Adara tilted her head. "Did you know him before we met?" Chuka's hand froze halfway to his glass of water. A heartbeat passed before he forced a small laugh. "No, of course not. Why would you think that?" She smiled faintly, though the question had lodged somewhere in her mind. The next day, the housekeeper, Mama Nkiru, called Adara into the storeroom. "Madam Ada," she whispered, glancing toward the hallway. "Please, I need to talk to you." Adara frowned. "What is it?" Mama Nkiru's face was pale, her eyes darting nervously. "You remember that young man, your friend, the one that cried at the burial?" "Chuka?" "Yes." The old woman hesitated, twisting her hands in her wrapper. "Has he told you who he is?" Adara laughed lightly. "He's my boyfriend, Mama." "What do you mean?" The woman shook her head slowly. Some things are not as they look, my dear. You need to ask questions about his family, where he come from. Don't just take everything by face." Adara frowned, unsettled. "Why are you saying this?" Mama Nkiru looked around again, then whispered, "Because I know that face. I've seen it before. Years ago. Inside this same house." Before Adara could reply, The front door opened, and Chuka's voice floated in. Adawara? You home? Mama Nkiru stepped back quickly, whispering, Ask him, before disappearing into the kitchen. That night, Adawara couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with Mama Nkiru's words. I've seen that face before. She turned to Chuka, who was lying beside her, staring at the ceiling. Babe, she said softly, can I ask you something? Where's your family from? He turned his head slowly, eyes unreadable. Why? I don't know, she said. I just realized I never really asked. He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. Enugu. But I grew up mostly in Abuja. Do you have any siblings? Not that I know of. Parents? He hesitated. My mum died when I was little. I never knew my dad. Adawara nodded, but her heart began to beat faster. The words hung in the air like smoke. I never knew my dad. When she looked at him again, his face was turned away, the muscles in his jaw tightening. 3 days later, Adawara went to her father's study for the first time since the funeral. The air smelled of old books and dust. The wooden shelves were filled with files and photo albums, most of which she'd never opened. She began sorting through them, intending to donate some to charity. But in one of the drawers, she found a faded brown envelope marked in her father's handwriting. Private for my eyes only. Her pulse quickened. She opened it carefully. Inside were a few documents and a single photograph of her father, much younger, standing beside a woman she didn't recognize. In her arms was a baby boy. The back of the photo had a date, 1995, Udi, Enugu. Beneath it was a folded letter addressed to my son, Chuka. Adawara's hands began to tremble. Adawara sat frozen in her father's old study, the air thick with dust and memory. Her eyes ran over the words on the envelope again. My son, Chuka. It felt like her heartbeat was echoing in the small room. For a long time, she didn't move. She just stared at the name, tracing it with her finger. There had to be another Chuka. It was a common enough name. Maybe it was someone else, a family friend, or a child her father sponsored. That had to be it. That the photograph said otherwise. She picked it up again, her father's young face, proud and smiling, beside a woman in a patterned wrapper, a tiny baby in her arms. The woman's smile was tired but soft, her eyes hauntingly familiar. Adawara squinted. There was something about that baby, the nose, the shape of the mouth. It was too much like Chuka. Her throat tightened. Impossible, she whispered. The house creaked around her as if the walls were listening. She opened the letter with trembling hands. Her father's handwriting was neat, deliberate, the same careful script he used for business documents. My dear son, I have watched you from afar for many years, unsure how to reach out without destroying the fragile peace of my home. You were born of a mistake, but also of a moment that taught me what it means to live with regret. Your mother, Azine, wanted me to be part of your life, but I failed her. I chose silence. I chose my image. Forgive me. If this letter ever reaches you, know that I never stopped thinking about you. That is why I set up the trust fund. That is why I made sure you would never want for education. Perhaps one day we will meet not as strangers, but as blood. Adawara's breath caught. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She dropped the letter and stumbled backward, her back hitting the shelf. Books fell, one after another, as if the whole room was collapsing around her. No, she whispered. No, no, no. Her mind spun in circles. The timelines, the coincidences, the way Chuka had cried at the funeral. It all began to make sense in a way she didn't want it to. That evening, her mother was sitting on the balcony when Adawara approached, the letter clutched in her shaking hand. The sun was dipping behind the hills, painting the city gold and pink. Mama, Adawara said quietly. Her mother looked up, eyes tired. Yes, my dear. Adawara's lips trembled. Who is Chuka? Her mother frowned. What kind of question is that? I mean to Daddy. Who was he to Daddy? Her mother's expression froze, the color draining from her face. Adara. What are you talking about? Adara threw the letter onto the table. This is what I'm talking about. Her mother stared at it for a long time, then picked it up slowly. When she finished reading, she closed her eyes and whispered something under her breath. A prayer, maybe, or a curse. Where did you find this? She finally asked. In his study, Adara said, her voice breaking. Mama, please. Tell me it's not true. Her mother's silence was answer enough. Adara felt her knees weaken. So it's true, she whispered. Chuka is my father's son. Her mother pressed a hand to her chest, eyes glistening. Your father made mistakes, Ada. Big ones. I didn't even know the boy survived. I thought the woman left Abuja after. After what? Her mother's voice dropped to a whisper. After your father paid her to disappear. Adara's breath caught. The world seemed to tilt. He paid her. She threatened to tell everyone. Your father was a public figure, a man of reputation. He couldn't afford scandal. Adara sank into a chair. So he sent money to hide his shame, and now I'm living it. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. My daughter, please. But Adara stood abruptly, backing away. Don't tell me to calm down. Mama, I've been sleeping next to my... She couldn't even finish the sentence. The words burned her tongue. That night, she didn't sleep. The sound of Chuka's breathing beside her felt unbearable. Every moment replayed in her mind. The way he'd first approached her at an art exhibition. The way her father had smiled politely when she'd introduced him. Even the way her mother had looked away that day. Had everyone known? The next morning, Adara drove aimlessly through Abuja, tears streaking her cheeks. Finally, she parked by Jabi Lake and stared out at the still water. The city's noise seemed far away. She called Chuka. Hey, babe. His voice came through, soft and tired. Can we meet? She asked. Sure. Where? Here, Jabi Lake. When he arrived, the wind was cold and the sky cloudy. Adara stood by the water's edge, her arms crossed. Chuka smiled faintly. You look pale. You okay? She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time she saw it. The resemblance. The jawline, the eyes, the shape of his nose. How had she missed it? Chuka, she said quietly. Who was your father? He blinked. I told you. I don't know. My mum never said much. Adara took a step closer. What was her name? Azine. He said after a pause. Why? The name hit Adara like a blow to the chest. She held out the letter. Because my father knew her. Chuka frowned, taking the letter. As he read, his expression shifted. Confusion first, then disbelief, then horror. When he finally looked up, his face was pale as chalk. No, he whispered. No, this can't be true. Adara's lips trembled. It is. He shook his head violently. No, Ada, listen. This doesn't make sense. It's not possible. It's written in his hand, she said, her voice breaking. You're his son. He stumbled backward, clutching the letter. That means... You and I... Adara couldn't speak. They stood there for what felt like hours, the silence between them louder than any sound. The wind picked up, carrying the letter from his trembling hand. It fluttered toward the lake, landing softly on the water before sinking out of sight. Chuka sank to his knees, his voice hoarse. I didn't know, Ada. I swear, I didn't know. She wanted to believe him, but all she could do was whisper, Neither did I. The days that followed were a blur. Neither Adara nor Chuka spoke much. Their phones stayed silent, their eyes hollow. Even the house, once full of laughter and music, seemed to hold its breath. Chuka had moved out of her apartment the same evening they discovered the truth. He said he needed time to think, but Adara knew what he meant. His face had carried the look of a man who'd lost everything, not just love, but identity itself. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word her father had ever said. Every time he called her my Ada, it now felt tainted, like a memory stolen from her. Once, she picked up her phone to call Chuka, then stopped. What would she even say? I forgive you? He hadn't done anything wrong, not really. They were both victims of a lie woven long before they met, yet the shame burned all the same. In another part of Abuja, Chuka sat alone in his tiny rented apartment. The blinds were half closed, the air thick with cigarette smoke and stale food. On the table lay the only thing he'd taken from Adawa's house, a framed picture of them at Jabi Lake, smiling under the sunlight. He couldn't look at it for long. Each time he did, a strange ache twisted in his chest. Grief, love, revulsion, all tangled together. The letter haunted him. Every word of his late father's apology rang in his head like a curse. You were born of a mistake, but also of a moment that taught me what it means to live with regret. He threw the photo frame across the room. It shattered against the wall. Regret? He muttered bitterly. You ruined us. He didn't blame Adara. She had every right to hate him, even though he was just as lost. What tore him apart was knowing that everything between them, the laughter, the plans, the whispered dreams, had never truly belonged to them. They were living inside someone else's sin. One afternoon, Mama Nkiru visited Adara quietly. She brought a bowl of ogbono soup and a bag of yam flour, saying, You need to eat, my dear. Adara tried to smile. Thank you, Mama, but I'm not hungry. The older woman looked at her kindly. Grief can hide in strange places. You've lost your father twice, haven't you? Adara frowned. What do you mean, twice? Mama Nkiru sighed. Once when he died, and again when you found out who he really was. The words struck deep. Adara nodded, tears slipping down her face. I don't even know how to mourn anymore. Mama Nkiru reached across the table, squeezing her hand. The living must not die with the dead, my child. Your father's mistakes are his own. Don't carry them. But Adara's mind was far away with Chuka, wondering what he was doing, if he'd eaten, if he was sleeping at all. 3 nights later, she got her answer. It was almost midnight when her phone rang. The name flashed across the screen. Chuka. Her heart leapt. She answered immediately. Chuka? But the voice on the other end wasn't his. It was trembling, unfamiliar. Good evening, madam. Are you Miss Adara Obadike? Yes, she said slowly. This is Inspector Balagan from the Mabushi police station. We found your number on a contact card belonging to a Mr. Chuka Naji. I'm sorry to inform you. Her breath caught. No, the words came out broken. Desperate. No, please. There was an incident, the officer said softly. He was found unresponsive in his apartment. It looks like he took his own life. Adara's world went silent. By morning, Abuja's sun rose harsh and unforgiving. She sat in her living room, numb, staring at the cup of tea that had long gone cold. Her mother tried to reach her, but Adara barely heard her voice. The world had lost color, sound, meaning. At the police station, she collected his belongings: a phone, a wallet, a small leather-bound notebook. Inside the notebook, written in shaky handwriting, was a single page that made her chest tighten. I loved you before I knew who I was, and that's what kills me. Not what we did, but what we never had the chance to undo. Her fingers trembled over the words. At his burial, there were no crowds, no speeches, no fanfare. Just a small patch of earth, a wooden cross, and the whisper of wind through the trees. Adara stood alone, her black veil fluttering. She didn't cry, she couldn't. The tears had dried somewhere deep inside her. She looked down at the simple name carved into the wood. Chuka NNAJI, 1995 to 2024. Her voice came out barely a whisper. You didn't deserve this. Behind her, the city hummed, life moving on as if nothing had happened. Cars passed, children laughed in the distance. The world refused to stop. But in Adaure's chest, something had shattered that could never be put back together. She would never be the same again. The end.